My name is Arthur MacLeod. I am 68 years old, and for most of those years, I believe the hardest battles of my life were already behind me. I was wrong. My son-in-law thought I was just a tired old man, a relic from a quieter time whose savings were sitting there unclaimed, waiting for someone with the nerve to take them. He came into my home while I was supposed to be asleep, moving through the dark with the careful confidence of someone who had already convinced himself he deserved what he was about to take. But what he discovered that night did not make him rich. It unraveled his entire world, and mine, for a little while too. I did not call the police, not right away. Instead, I let him walk into a trap that had been waiting 37 years for the right person to step into it. A trap built not from anger, but from patience, and from a truth that two families had been carrying in opposite pockets for nearly 4 decades. Before I tell you how a photocopied survey document and a handwritten letter dismantled a man's entire sense of who he was, I want to know how far this story has traveled. Leave a comment below and tell me where in Canada you are listening from tonight. And if you believe that quiet people sometimes carry the loudest stories, please hit that subscribe button. It would mean a great deal to me. It began on a Sunday in late October, the kind of gray, rain-soaked afternoon that settles over Victoria like a wool blanket. My daughter Claire and her husband Trevor had driven over from their side of town, and I had spent the morning making my late wife Margaret's lentil soup, the one she always made when the weather turned. The smell of it still makes the house feel less empty than it actually is. Claire came through the door first, her cheeks pink from the cold, pulling me into the kind of hug that tells you she means it. She has always been that way, generous with her warmth, entirely without calculation. Trevor followed her, shaking my hand with the hearty grip of a man who has practiced his handshakes. He was wearing a new jacket I had not seen before, something expensive looking, which struck me as odd given what Claire had let slip a few weeks earlier about their finances. We sat down and Trevor made himself comfortable in the old reading chair by the window, the one I had reupholstered myself the summer after Margaret passed. He looked around the living room with the slow, appraising eye of someone doing an informal appraisal. I had seen that look before, many times, in my 30 years as a structural engineer. It is the look a man wears when he is calculating load-bearing capacity. The house is a good one. I built it myself on a lot I purchased in Saanich back in 1989, when land on the island was still something an ordinary working family could afford. 3 bedrooms, a workshop in the back, and a garden that Margaret spent 20 years turning into something genuinely beautiful. In today's market, it is worth considerably more than I ever imagined it would be when I was pouring the foundation with 2 friends and a rented mixer. Trevor knew the value. He had looked it up. I had suspected this for some time, but I had no proof. Not yet. The soup was good. Claire talked about her students she teaches art at a middle school in Esquimalt, and I listened and nodded, the way you do when you love someone and everything they say is worth hearing. Trevor ate without much interest, his eyes drifting periodically toward the old oak credenza against the far wall, the one where I keep my filing boxes, my tax records, and my important envelopes. He was not subtle about it. He was not trying to be. Then Claire, in her innocent and generous way, cracked the door open without knowing it. She set down her spoon and looked at her husband with the careful expression of someone about to say something she has been rehearsing. "Trevor," she started, "Dad might be able to help with the investment property situation. Just temporarily. He has the equity, and you said yourself." Trevor's fork came down against the bowl with a sharp sound that stopped her mid-sentence. "Claire, we talked about this." His voice was even, but the evenness was the kind that takes effort to maintain. "We are not doing this." She shrank slightly. "I just thought, your father has enough to worry about," he said, and then turned to me with a smile so polished it might have been laminated. "Sorry about that, Arthur. She worries. You know how she is." "I do know how she is. She is kind. She sees the best in people. She married this man because she believed the best she saw in him was the whole of him." I smiled back at Trevor and said something forgiving and warm, the kind of thing you say when you are not yet ready to show your hand. After dinner, while Claire helped me carry the bowls to the kitchen, I could hear Trevor on his phone in the hallway, his voice low and clipped. Something about timing, Something about not being able to wait much longer. That night, after they left, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, and I made a decision. Not an angry decision, a careful one. In my years as an engineer, I learned that the most dangerous failures are not the ones that happen suddenly. They are the ones that have been developing quietly inside the structure for years, invisible to everyone except the person who knows exactly what to look for. I had been watching Trevor for 3 years. I had been watching the small erosions, the way he spoke about money, the way he looked at my property, the way he occasionally let something slip and then recovered with that reflexive smile. I had seen the structure. I knew where the cracks were. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. Confronting Trevor before I had evidence would accomplish nothing except to give him warning. He would adapt his story. He would use Claire as a buffer. He would find a way to make my concern look like the suspicion of a lonely old man who didn't want to let his daughter go. No. I was going to give him exactly what he was looking for, and I was going to make sure that every single moment of it was recorded. The next morning, I called my financial planner, a steady and deeply competent woman named Beverly Okafor, who had been managing my RRSPs and my TFSA for 11 years. I told her what I suspected and what I intended to do. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about her. I want to move the liquid assets, I said. Everything in the GIC and the non-registered accounts. I want them consolidated into the family trust we set up after Margaret died. You're thinking he might try to access something, she said. I'm thinking he already has a plan, I told her. I just want to make sure there is nothing where he expects it to be. We made the arrangements that same day. The accounts he did not know about and could not access were already protected by the trust structure. What remained was the safety deposit box at my credit union branch downtown, the one Margaret and I had opened together the year we paid off the mortgage. That box was the piece I intended to use. My next call was to my oldest friend, a man named Gordon Flett, who had spent 30 years with the RCMP and now lived 20 minutes away in a house full of books and a very patient Labrador. Gordon has a gift for listening to complicated situations and identifying their simplest moving parts. I explained everything over the phone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need documentation of the attempt, not just your word." "I know," I said. "You need him to commit to the action on record, in a place you can prove." "I know," I said again. There was a brief silence, and then Gordon said, "I have a nephew who installs home security systems. He owes me a favor." 3 days later, a small camera had been fitted inside the smoke detector in my bedroom, angled perfectly toward the nightstand. Gordon's nephew did it in under 45 minutes and left no trace. The feed was encrypted and streamed to an app on my phone. I tested it 3 times from different positions in the room, and the image was crisp, clear, and complete. The next piece was the phone call. I waited until a Tuesday morning, a time I knew Claire would be in class, and Trevor would be between appointments at the property management firm where he worked. I wanted him slightly off balance, accessible, but not settled. I dialed Claire's number, knowing she would tell him about it before noon. She answered after 2 rings. "Hi, Dad. Is everything all right?" I let a small tremor into my voice. Nothing theatrical, just enough. "Honey, I'm sorry to bother you at work." "You never bother me. What is it?" I let out a slow breath. "I've been thinking about getting my paperwork in order. You know, Ray Calloway from my old firm passed away last month, and his family had a terrible time because nothing was organized." "Oh, Dad, I didn't know about Ray. I'm so sorry. He was a good man." It reminded me that I haven't looked in that safety deposit box at the credit union in years. I can't even quite remember everything I put in there. The will is in there, I think, and some of Margaret's jewelry, and the original title to the house. But honestly, sweetheart, I've been so forgetful lately. I let the word forgetful settle in the air between us for a moment. "We should go together," she said immediately. "We can make an afternoon of it." "That's what I was hoping," I said. "The thing is, I'm not comfortable driving downtown anymore, and I know you're busy with school. I was wondering if you and Trevor might take me next weekend. I just want to lay eyes on everything, make sure it's all there." The key is right in my nightstand, the little brass one, on the red key ring. It's been there for years. Of course we'll take you, Claire said. Hang on, Trevor is actually here. Let me just... I heard the muffled sound of the phone being handed over, and then his voice, warm and immediate. Arthur, absolutely. We'll clear whatever we need to. You just name the day. Thank you, son, I said. Using that word intentionally, watching its weight land through the phone, I just get turned around sometimes. At my age, you start to wonder what you'd do if you lost a key like that. It's the only one I have. Goodness knows what it would cost to get that box drilled open. There was a pause. Barely a pause. A half-second in which I could hear him processing the information I had just given him. The location, the uniqueness, the vulnerability. Don't you worry about that key, he said. We'll make sure you and it get to that branch safe and sound. After I hung up, I sat for a while without moving. There was no satisfaction in what I had just done. There was only the cold and necessary feeling of a man who has finished laying the groundwork and must now wait to see whether the structure holds. I spent the following afternoon at the credit union. I had called ahead and asked for the branch manager, a soft-spoken man named David Chow who had known me for over a decade. Gordon had also called him the previous day to explain the situation in general terms, enough for David to understand what might be coming without enough detail to compromise anything legally. David met me at the door. He shook my hand with both of his. Whatever you need, Arthur, he said. We're going to take good care of you. In the private viewing room, I opened box 247 for the last time, as it was currently organized. I removed everything of genuine value Margaret's brooch, the original title documents, the certified copies of the trust, the share certificates from my old engineering partnership, and placed them carefully in a new box that David had already registered under the family trust name. That box would sit in a different section of the vault, accessible only with a second key that I handed to David directly and asked him to hold. What I left in box 247 was a single manila envelope. Inside it, I placed two documents. The first was a copy of a land survey from 1987, a 40-acre parcel in what was then undeveloped territory north of Langford. Two names were on the original purchase agreement, Arthur D. MacLeod and Raymond G. Sinclair. Raymond Sinclair was Trevor's father. The second document was the judgment from the BC Supreme Court, filed in 1991. Raymond Sinclair had attempted to refinance the property using falsified documents that removed my name from the title. He had been counting on the fact that my signature could be replicated closely enough, and that a man like me, a quiet engineer without deep pockets or powerful connections, would not fight back. He had been wrong about that. Franklin Achebe, a young lawyer fresh from UBC who took my case because he believed it was right, not because it was profitable, won me a full judgment. The court awarded me sole ownership of the property. Raymond Sinclair was found to have committed fraudulent misrepresentation. He appealed once and lost. What he did not know, and what Trevor's family had evidently chosen to forget, was what that land became. Langford today is not what it was in 1987. That 40 acres was subdivided a decade after the court ruling and sold in parcels during the first great wave of Victoria's suburban expansion. The proceeds funded my retirement, Margaret's care in her final years, and the trust that now protects everything I have left to give my daughter. The fortune Trevor had been circling was built on the very land his father had tried to steal from me. I sealed the envelope. On the front, I wrote in my clearest block letters, "For Trevor Sinclair." Then I placed it in the center of the empty box, closed the lid, and locked it. David Chow walked me to the door. He looked at me steadily. "Arthur," he said, "if anyone comes in claiming access to that box, we'll handle it exactly the way Gordon described." I nodded. "I know you will, David." I drove home through the early evening gray, the city lights just beginning to come on. I did not feel victorious. I felt the way you feel after finishing a very long and difficult piece of work, tired, certain, and ready for whatever comes next. 4 nights later, at just after 2 a.m, the screen on my phone showed me a change. The bedroom door opened slowly, so slowly that the movement was almost imperceptible on the feed. A figure stepped in, paused, and listened. I was in the guest room down the hall, watching on my phone, with the screen brightness turned all the way down, my heart measured and steady in my chest. He was more careful than I expected. He stood near the door for almost 2 full minutes before he moved. He did not use a flashlight. He navigated by the faint ambient light from the street outside and the glow of the neighbor's porch lamp that comes through the curtain gap I had deliberately left open. The camera caught him with the unhurried clarity of a machine that does not blink. He moved to the nightstand. He paused again. His hand reached out and gripped the drawer pull, and he eased it open with the excruciating slowness of a man who has been rehearsing this moment in his mind for weeks. I watched his hand close around the small brass key on the red key ring. He lifted it, tilted it in the low light, confirmed what it was. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket with the deliberate care of someone who has told himself he is not doing anything wrong, that this is merely correcting an imbalance, that he is owed this. He closed the drawer. He gave one last look toward the empty bed, the pillow I had arranged carefully under the blanket. Then he slipped back through the door and pulled it closed behind him. I sat in the dark of the guest room for a long time after that, watching the still, quiet image of my empty bedroom on the phone screen. The recording was clean. The timestamp was clear. There was not a single ambiguous frame. In the morning, he was a different man. Claire called me just after 8, her voice carrying the brightness of someone who has been given good news. She said Trevor had an important client meeting downtown, and would it be all right if they came by later in the week instead of this weekend? She sounded lighter than she had in months. He had told her something was turning around, that he felt good about things. I told her, of course. Any time was fine. I loved her, and I would see her soon. Then I called Gordon and told him it was done. He told me he would handle the next step. I got dressed. I made coffee. I sat by the window in the garden chair Margaret had always liked, looking out at her roses, which still come back every spring without any encouragement from me, as if they decided long ago to outlast everything. 2 days later, David Chow called me. His voice was professionally composed. "Arthur, we had a visit this morning. He came in at 11. He had the key. He presented himself as your son-in-law acting on your behalf." "What happened?" I asked. "He was given access to the viewing room," David said. "He was in there for approximately 4 minutes. When he came out, he was David paused, choosing the word carefully, very quiet. Our security team was waiting. We explained to him that the account had been flagged for unauthorized access, that the names on record did not match his identification, and that his attempt to access the box using a key obtained outside normal authorization channels would be referred to the appropriate parties. "Is he still there?" I asked. "No," David said. He declined to wait. He did leave his contact information when asked. There was a brief silence. Then David said, quietly, "Whatever you had in that envelope, Arthur, I think it did exactly what you needed it to do." I thanked him and set the phone down on the table. That evening, I called Claire. My voice was calm. I told her I needed her to come to the house, that there was something I needed to show her. I told her to come alone. She was at my door in 20 minutes, still in her coat, her face a knot of worry and confusion. "Dad, what is going on? Trevor came home this afternoon and he wouldn't speak to me. He's been sitting in the study since 3 o'clock. He won't tell me anything. Come and sit down," I said. She sat on the sofa. I sat across from her. I had the laptop open on the coffee table between us, the recording already cued to the beginning of the clip. She looked at the frozen image on the screen. She tilted her head. "Is that—" I pressed play. She recognized the room immediately. She recognized the timestamp. She recognized the way he moved, the specific shape of him in the dark, the jacket he had been wearing 3 nights ago. I watched her face as her mind worked its way through the only possible interpretation of what she was seeing. I watched her arrive at it, and I watched the moment it landed. Her hand went to her mouth. The clip ran to the end. The door closed. I paused the playback. She didn't look at the screen anymore. She looked at me, and her eyes were full of a grief that had no bottom to it. The kind that comes not from a single blow, but from the sudden understanding that many smaller things you had excused or explained away were, in fact, all pointing in the same direction. She said my name once, very softly, as if she was checking whether I was still real. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said. Then I told her the rest. Not the version of it shaped by anger, but the plain and factual version. The one that had been waiting in a filing box in my workshop for 37 years. I told her about Raymond Sinclair. I told her about the land north of Langford, the survey stakes I had walked myself, the partnership agreement I had signed with a man I believed I could trust. I told her about the refinancing attempt, the forged signature, the morning I received a registered letter from a law office I had never heard of and understood in an instant exactly what had happened. I told her about Franklin Achebe and the 14 months it took to win the case. I told her what the judgment said and what it cost Raymond Sinclair in reputation and money. I told her that Trevor had grown up in a household shaped by that failure, that his father had spent the rest of his working life blaming everyone except himself for what he had lost. And then I told her where the money had come from. The land, Langford, the subdivision, the proceeds that built the retirement fund that became the trust that would, one day, be hers. I watched her put it together. I watched her understand that the life I had built for her was rooted in the same piece of ground that Trevor's family had spent 4 decades resenting. That he had married her without knowing this, that his father's greed had cost the Sinclairs everything, and that the man she married had come into my home in the dark of night to try to finish what his father started. She cried, not loudly, not dramatically. Claire has always processed grief the way she does everything, with a certain quiet dignity that reminds me so much of her mother. I sometimes have to look away. After a while, she wiped her eyes and looked at me directly. She asked me one question. She asked me if I had planned all of this because I wanted to destroy her marriage, or because I wanted to protect her. I told her the truth. I said I had hoped, until the recording proved otherwise, that I was wrong about Trevor. I said I had hoped the greed I saw was just stress, just pressure, something that would pass. I said that setting the trap was not something I had wanted to do. It was something I had needed to do, the same way a doctor needs to take a difficult image in order to know exactly what they are dealing with. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she looked down at her left hand, at the ring she had been wearing for 4 years. She turned it once, slowly, and I saw in her face the full weight of a decision being made. She did not look uncertain. She looked like a woman who has just learned the precise dimensions of a room she has been living in and has decided she can no longer stay in it. She took the ring off. She set it on the edge of the coffee table, and the small sound it made against the wood was the last sound in the room for a very long moment. She looked at me and said, simply, "I think I need to call someone tonight who isn't Trevor." I told her she could stay in her old room for as long as she needed. I never had another direct conversation with Trevor Sinclair. His lawyer contacted Gordon shortly after, and Gordon, not my lawyer, simply my oldest friend, sent back a reply that clearly communicated the scope of what we had documented and what it could mean for Trevor if any of it were pursued formally. The formal complaint from the credit union regarding the unauthorized access attempt resolved itself quietly. Trevor understood the terms of a quiet exit. He took them. I never pressed for anything more, not because he deserved mercy, but because my daughter did not deserve a prolonged legal proceeding in the center of her life. Some traps are not meant to hold people. They are meant to show people who they are. Let them see it clearly, and let them go. It is spring now. The roses are coming back in the garden, as they always do. Claire has been staying in her old room for 3 weeks, and on Saturday we drove out to Langford together. I showed her the neighborhood where the 40 acres used to be, the streets that run through what was once red clay and Douglas fir. She walked slowly and didn't say much, and I didn't fill the silence with anything, because she didn't need me to. On the drive home, she asked me what Franklin Achebe was doing now. I told her he was a judge in Vancouver. She smiled at that. She is going to be all right. She has Margaret's ability to absorb a hard truth and build something honest on the other side of it. That is not a small inheritance. When I got home, I went to the workshop and stood for a while among my tools and my clocks and my half-finished pieces of furniture. I thought about what it means to build things that are meant to last. A house, a company, a family. The materials change, but the principle is always the same. You need a foundation that tells the truth about the ground it is sitting on. Everything else is just load-bearing walls. And walls, if they are built honestly, can hold up through an extraordinary amount. If this story has stayed with you, I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories where this one came from. And somewhere in Canada tonight, there is somebody sitting with a cup of tea and a complicated truth they have been carrying for a long time. If that is you, I am glad you are here. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I read every single one.